My guest today has successfully scaled and exited three VC-backed startups. One of his companies generated customers $100 million in revenue. He spent more than 20 years in tech working with companies like AWS and Microsoft, but today he is all in on AI agents. And in this episode, we're going to dig into everything he's working on right now, including the AI brain that basically runs his life, what running a team of agents is actually like, and what stays valuable in a world where anyone can build software. Nick, it's great to have you on the show. First question, what is the thing that is most exciting you right now?
Sure. I mean, my background had always been trying to automate things that humans did, or to find things that humans wouldn't be willing to do the work to discover. Right. So, I remember early in my consulting career, I was at Microsoft Consulting for a bunch of time. And it was like, how do we automate these, this marketing landing page creation so we don't have to create these pages anymore? Or how do we automate three-way financial production for an investment bank so we don't need accountants anymore? And like that superpower is out now. So, I think it became pretty hard I stopped software engineering for 10 years and about 2 years ago got back into it just after some of these tools came out, because it was like, wow, there's stuff I wanted to build for a real long time that, I knew, like, I'd like to build that, but I don't have 6 months to spend on this. And it became like, yeah, I've always wanted a stink bid tracker on futures markets. Okay, I can do that in 2 days. And so just all of a sudden started producing stuff. And, it's obviously become a super powerful time for people to produce. So, for me, my role and focus, I'd left a big tech a few months back. I'm like, how do I automate myself? Like, I just want to automate me so I don't have to, I can be a 10x, 100x, 1000x me in everything that I do. And so that's been my passion project for the last 3 months. And it's come out like all sorts of really novel and interesting things have come out of that pursuit. So that's where I started. And that's what most interests me, is how do you have the highest amount of impact doing the least amount of work? And I always joke, it's like, I will do so much work in the pursuit of not working. I can work infinite time if there's some carrot at the end of this, which apparently is, there won't be work involved afterwards. So yeah, there's a paradox and I think many AI builders are finding this right now. Like, yeah, you might be 10 or 100 times more productive, but you're working more than you ever were. So it's fascinating.
Do you have any specific examples of things that you've like automated or built recently that have been, I guess, game changers for you?
Sure. Well, I mean, there's two projects that I'm really been pursuing, and I can share about both. But the first one is like, just the problem that I was experiencing is, as I'm engaging with like chat tools, and I'm using Cursor here and ChatGPT there, and like most of us are engaging with it. I'm like, these things don't have context about me and my life. There's too much going on, right? So, my passion projects recently has been to build out a brain for myself, right? Like a fully agentic brain. So it knows everything that I do and can decide just how I would decide, and talk just like how I would talk, and be available everywhere. So, regardless of whether I'm using Cursor or Claude or OpenAI or WhatsApp or Telegram or Hermes or, whatever AI I'm using, how does that AI have full access to everything that would be relevant to me in my life? So, I think that you may have had this experience as well. Like, you take a meeting, you have a bunch of really interesting things get said, and you'd say you'd do some things and they said they'd do some things. And it's like, then you move on to the next meeting, and I'd end up writing down a bunch of notes or like to-dos and that kind of thing. And I get to the end of the day and my notes is like this boss that I didn't want, that was like, past me during the day committing to do stuff that I don't want to do now. And there was lots of great, insights and principles and intelligence that like were just gone, and maybe, what was that thing that they said? So I think, like many of us, I just started recording out some of my, like, all the things that were happening. And then, okay, well then how can we build intelligence out of this? Like, what principles are emerging out of this? What playbooks are emerging out of this? And every time I engage with, email or, I'm researching something. Okay, well, how does that make this thing smarter as well? So, and I'd seen the emergence of, so this is for me has been an absolute game changer because I've got complete access to all my context on everything. And it's not just for me, it's for agents, right? Because in the pursuit of having agents act as I would, they need access to all the context that I would have and my playbooks for how I decide. So, through that process, I've been spending a ton of time, like deep dive interviewing myself and others on how they decide things. Like, what are your judgment frameworks? Like, we have a ton of intelligence in the world of AI. What we often lack is judgment for, certain scenarios. So, I've been building software businesses for 20 years, both here and in North America, and, made a lot of mistakes, made a lot of great decisions as well. How do I decide? And so I also went and interviewed other founders and was like, how do I extract as much judgment out of folks so that my agents know what to decide for themselves and when to escalate? Or can I use, judgment playbooks out of Nick? Or so those things have been really cool. So having an agentic brain just to power my entire life has been, that's a complete game changer for me. Like, I asked it recently and I can't tell you what it was, but I'm like, I wonder what this thing actually knows about me. I'm like, what are my hopes, fears, and desires? And like, it's scary, like it's got everything. So, lots of stuff there. But in terms of efficacy, it just means that my agents can run and I'm never reprompting them on context. I think these things aren't novel to solve. There's a ton of interesting stuff around memory management, around conversation history, about what becomes interesting as well. Is like, just like all of us, like I have to be quite mindful about what I put in my brain, right? My agentic brain. And in the same way I do in the real world, like, you don't want to sit around and eat a ton of Doritos, like that's bad for your body. You don't want to sit around and watch a ton of TikTok. It's probably bad for your mind. And my agents the same. I have to be relatively disciplined about what I let my brain go to.
Amazing. Would you be open to walking through how you might actually start building something like that?
Well, look, this isn't a novel concept. Building our company brains is a thing that many folks are doing. Conceptually, like most folks, you probably got a granola or a Fireflies or something taking notes. I think what building our brain for me is, thinking through what are the data sources of my life, number one, right? So, that would be, okay, I capture all my meetings on Granola and, I'm talking on Telegram and WhatsApp, or, when I interact with YouTube, what do I like or what do I want to share? I'm obviously Gmail, Google Calendar. There's a ton of context most folks have in their ChatGPT or whatever current tools they've currently been using. Pairing that with Google Docs, Dropbox, GitHub repos. There's hundreds of sources, and for the enterprise, the businesses, the same things coming across, CRM, Slack. So it doesn't really matter what the list of sources are, but they need to be ingested. And then there's an intelligence layer that runs over the top of them, right? Which, normalizes all the information, decides what to write, what auto applies as a fact, what needs your decision to come in. And, there's some gated things to say, hey, does this come in or not? Or, hey, you've told me this, but that contradicts with that, those kinds of things. And how does it get smarter over time? So, I think we get sources, we have some kind of intelligence layer that sucks them in. And then it's about putting them somewhere durable. For me, that sits on GitHub and it's nice and secure. Agents are running this entire thing, but the cool thing about having it on GitHub is like, all right, now I can chat with it on Obsidian, or like I can play with the data everywhere. So, my phone, my laptop, on a web browser somewhere, it's all there. So, anyone with the willingness to do it. I mean, I think what's given me a bit of an unfair advantage in building this is, and this is sort of the other part of my passion project, is, as I started, coding up again using AI tools over the last couple of years, I'd want to build something. And I noticed that, the tools weren't working unless I was sitting in front of the computer. And that really annoyed me because I'm either roadblock in my own work and I'm sitting there waiting for my tooling to process something. And I say, oh, no, actually you should have done this and change this to this and move on to this next bit. So I realized at this point, like I'm the blocker in my own life, right? Like I stand in the middle of me and getting all the things done that I want to get done. And how do I build out, because I'm building software products. Could I productize, could I create an agent that builds agents, right? Or how could I have an agent that builds out my software factories for me? So I built an agentic software factory, which would, is one agent that manages multiple other agents and swarms of other agents and keeps them all up to date and makes sure they're secure and has the right updates and the right memory and the right token optimization and all that stuff. Because like at some points I've spun this up and like, boom, I got a $5,000 bill one day. And I'm like, whoa, okay, I accidentally crunched, way too many tokens on some ad hoc task that I didn't mean to. So, because I had this agentic software factory, I used it to build my brain. And, I'm not that anyone couldn't do this themselves. But that software factory for me came from, an opinionated framework that I developed out on, like, how do I build software? Right? How do I build products? Like I've worked on over 200 web applications, software applications, business transformation projects. Like, okay, how do I decide? How do I structure these? And so I took all of that software knowledge and then all the economics and go-to-market knowledge paired with this and said, okay, this is how Nick would go about building out any software product or software business. And that forms the basis. So, it challenges me on my intent and those things. So again, anyone could do it. If you wanted to build out something like this, cool, go grab an agent, connect them to all your sources. I'd encourage you to think a little bit about security because, giving an agent read-write access to your email and your Dropbox in parallel opens a massive can of worms if you're not careful about it. From a security perspective, tons of like prompt injection risk and things like this. So yeah, that's kind of how I built out that. And it's, I see other people doing, like, there's a lot of folks building out company brains, personal brains, if you're interested in it. I think Cloudflare just launched a brain project of all places. So yeah, tons of cool brains. Gary Tan out of Y Combinator launched the G-Brain project, which is super cool for creating that search layer over all the data. So yeah, tons of people building really cool things in this space. I think it's I think ultimately it'll be commoditized as a space. I don't think it's a place where we'll see, amazing new companies emerge. Again, I'll probably be very wrong about that, but any of the hyperscalers or incumbent AI providers will likely ship this in 6 or 12 months for everyone.
Yeah, wow. And so did it start with building that software factory based on your principles and that built the brain and then that's building other?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, what I found is like, okay, build a software factory that creates agents and other pieces of software that I wanted to build, because by the time I had 4, 6, 8 agents running each on their own instance on the web, like they didn't know anything about each other and they didn't know anything about me, and how I would think about things. And it became really important. Like, okay, an agent's running, and if it's unaware of some important aspect of another project or my life or a decision framework or, this agent, we'd spend a lot of time enforcing these sets of decisions, right? And then another agent's running and it has no awareness of that. So I think that's kind of what spawned the origin of okay, I need all my agents to have some shared judgment, shared brain, yeah, which thinks like me and would decide like me. Because like, ultimately the gap between what makes, in all AI or all the agents, it's like the things that go wrong for me seem to come down to a lack of shared understanding. Like, what I think the word project means and what my agent thinks the word project means are different things, right? So like we all use words to describe stuff and you and I might have a shared understanding of what this means, but the devil becomes in the details. Like what precisely do you mean with a phase or a project or a task or a goal? So yeah, it gets pretty linguistic at some points. Sending any agent or any AI to go and do something without deep clarity that the things you mean and the things they think you mean are the same thing. Especially with long running agents, like, hey, agent, go build this one bit of software that's going to integrate 100 different things. Well, like the chance that it's going to screw up along the way or will happen because you diverted on your shared understanding. So I take a ton of time to get those shared understanding right.
Wow. Okay. So now you've got kind of the foundation set up. What does a day or a week look like for you? Like, are you building heaps of products or like, because I mean, that gives you so much potential.
Yeah. I sometimes feel like the analogy I use, like in the AI era, it feels like sometimes like a tinny with a 400 horsepower engine on the back, which is like you can go really fast in every direction. It's like, hang on, which direction am I supposed to be going here? So the good news is like what a day and a week looks like. There's stuff that's locked down and stabilized and agentified to a level of stability where it's only really bugging me if it needs something to be done, and I've got a sense that consistently, okay, these are the things happening on a daily basis. So whether that's scheduling and emailing and calendaring and notes and all that fun, just admin stuff that sucks in our lives. So, how do we make that all go away? Then, okay, I want to do things as a result of engaging with folks, or I've got an insight. So, for me, I keep a backlog of all the insights that I've come up with, and they're all, categorized against each other. So like, what is the thing to be working on? There's so many things to be working on. I don't tend to prioritize my own life. I'll let my agent do that. It's like, hey, this is the highest value thing that you need to be working on. And sometimes I disagree with it. I want to go work on something that interests me, not something that's of, high expected value. But yeah, so day in life might be, okay, I'm checking some agent reports in the morning. Like, okay, did it all do the things it said it would? I'll be irritated at some aspect of something and, update some rules. But practically, I just want to build product that users get their hands on. So, when I see something that's valuable to others, like, for example, I was having some annoying issue. I spent a bit of time in San Francisco and come back here, and I'm like, okay, I go to a bunch of AI events that I'm like, I don't know why I went. It wasn't that interesting. Other ones I go to are super interesting. And but time's precious. Like, how do you make sure you just do the things that are interesting? So, I build out an agent that would categorize all the events that were going on and critically analyze them and say, hey, look, Nick, these 3 things are worth going to this week, and here's why. So I made that available to others, and it was just categorizing all the AI events that I could find, both online that were in Australian time zone. So, hey, look, there's a really cool, online event out of the OpenAI community in Seattle talking about this aspect of frontier models, or how to use, retrieval augmented generation on your personal models, or some technical aspect, or, maybe it's a commercial product. Like, how are we using automated go-to-market tools to acquire customers for emerging products in AI? Okay, that's worth checking out. But there's so much stuff. So, just that recommendation of what 3 things should you go to this week, I was like, well, I think others might want that. So, that just gets sort of productized in and prompt that out, and the website's up, and there's software and mailing lists and all this fun stuff, and people are using it. I'm like, cool. So that just kind of sits there, does what it does. So, I think the sort of North Star of this ultimately, I think, is, and many folks have tried this, or I meet folks who are trying this, is just to build like fully agentic businesses, right? So as a fully agentic entrepreneur, can you build fully agentic businesses? And that means, an agentic CEO. So I'm the founder, and I've hired an agentic CEO, and he's got some VPs who work for him, and they've got some line workers that do the under things. And, setting up these frameworks of agents that would run like an organization. And it's been really interesting watching these guys, talk to each other, and when do they push back? I sometimes, like, early on in starting doing this, I was like, oh, but these agents aren't doing anything. Like, they'd complete a task and then nothing happens for 5 days. I'm like, prodding it, being like, do stuff, why aren't you doing more? And so I was like, I went back to my like sprint and project management days, and I'm like, all right, we're doing a daily stand up, you agents. And so all the agents have to show up every day and say what they've done, what they failed at, and what their goal for the next day is. And so when you get a team of agents holding other agents accountable on a daily basis, they tend to do more stuff. All right, well, that's interesting. So yeah, all those fun things. But yeah, I think like the things that have worked really well is, for every agent with a goal, I try and have, well, now or always have, is an adversarial agent that's kind of working against it, right? So like a devil's advocate. So well done. You've spec'd out how this change request should happen, or hey, I've made a go-to-market motion to experiment with. Okay, now we need this critiqued, and I want someone whose task is to be adversarial. And then I found that these things would sometimes go in loops infinitely. So I don't let them fight more than 3 times. It's like you get 3 spars with each other and then you're done. And that the quality is usually good enough. Lots of other interesting social dynamics between agents have emerged. Like I was running daily retrospectives like you would in Scrum or software development, project development. And I noticed that these guys were never like producing the actual outputs because they would always work retrospectively. So when I had agents retrospective their own work, they would always look backwards to fix new things. So I was like, okay, humans don't do that. Agents behave differently. So the social dynamics of agents become interesting. So I'm like, all right, we only do weekly retrospectives now. So you've got at least 6 days of the week to look forward and actually ship stuff. So yeah, fascinating things emerge.
How much of the value is in just getting more stuff done for you? And how much of the value is more in helping you figure out the right things to do?
Yeah, great question. Column A and column B, right? So again, like on the small, tinny, big outboard, it's the right balance of focus and drive, I suppose. So I think there's so many shiny things. Part of what I do is just ongoingly measuring the expected value of the tasks that I and my agents work on. So, I think any of us can okay, go to ChatGPT, right? And go, give me 10 business ideas to make money. Great. All right. And then you'll refine that and say, all right, okay, give me actually which one's going to cost the amount and, which expected value. And if you drill down into any one, then there'll be some competitive things that it didn't come up with, or it's, misjudged. So, I like to see this as like you're going down a road and there'll be little forks in the road. And, I don't know whether I should be taking this fork or not. But, for me, it's like, I'm okay to take a little quest down that road, a couple of steps. Like, if there's a dragon there, you come back. If there's like a path through, okay, maybe we'd be going there. So, these things tend to expand out over time. So yeah, how do you know what to work on? Yeah, I think it's really important. It's something I struggle with, to be fair, because like it's so interesting to work on interesting things. But what I've also found in agentic building is just there's more to be discovered. Like there's problems to be found when I'm just experimenting. So if as a company, like I've got the luxury of I'm not running right now to a commercial outcome. It's just purely research and experimentation. But out of this comes products, and out of the products comes like, okay, well, look, we solve a problem for users. Like we've got clarity that, these bunch of users have this problem, or if we fully understand it, what's the least amount of software or product we can build that will meaningfully alleviate that problem for them. And then can I go and acquire users for that in some kind of reasonably cost-effective way? And do they hang around? What's the retention look like on that? So I do think we're in one of the period, like the period, people say it's like the best time ever to be a builder. I think it's also one of the hardest times because it's an absolute red ocean of SaaS and agent and AI businesses. Like, one of the insights I'd come up with was, okay, well, websites, this is a while back, but like, okay, websites that exist need to be optimized for GPTs, GEO emerges. And it's like, all right, great. Well, let's create a service that analyzes and does this. And, launched it up, get a couple of grand in recurring revenue. And, 3 weeks later, there's 45 other people doing it. So, I think a lot about, durability of revenue, not just speed of execution. So like, yeah, okay, it's really easy to move really fast, but distribution becomes a moat. Cool, yeah, network effects, data effects, all those things. But I think a lot about durability of revenue in executing, because I think it's really easy as an AI builder to move really fast, and that's super cool. But if you can be competed away by a team of smart AI folks in a weekend vibe coding, like there's no defensibility to it. So, where does that durability of revenue come from is probably my key guiding factor in all the things that I think about.
Mm. And is that where you're spending most of your time at the moment on figuring out which projects to build, sorry, which products to build, and then building them and testing them out, looking for that next thing? Is that the
Sure. That sounds like a very sensible thing to do. So, yeah. Look, I think there's important to leave space for just imagination and creativity and exploration, because behind every problem is another problem. So, if the new wave of entrepreneurs are having multiple experiments, sure, like I think we can always shut down every experiment for a reason that it won't work. Like I think the right in entrepreneurship, like it's really easy to look smart saying like, hey, and I've posted about this on LinkedIn recently, but like, it's really easy to look smart by shutting down other people's smart ideas. It's sort of like a hack for being like looking intelligent in the community. And if you're wrong, no one ever remembers, right? It's harder to find out, what's the one way to make this work? There's a wall in between every entrepreneur and the outcome that they want. And, the entrepreneur's role is to find a way through that wall or over that wall in a way that other people don't see. Some walls are too big and you probably shouldn't climb them. Other walls are impenetrable. So, solving unsolvable problems seems to be a bit of a dead end. But, yeah, I think a little bit about, okay, well, where is there a meaningful chance of solving this problem in a way that's differentiated enough where there's some durability of revenue, and it's non-trivial to build this. Again, like if a team of vibe coders can build what you're building in a weekend, like it's probably not worth pursuing as a business. And those dynamics have changed in the last 10 years.
how fast do you think that changes? I mean, the ability for a non-technical person to whip up some, like I say, a very high quality application with like great security, like everything's baked into it as like, a top engineering team would do. Like, how far do you think we are from that point?
It's really cool to see lots and lots of non-technical people become product builders. I think we're seeing it all the time, and Claude especially has turned a lot of folks into, tools that automate their own lives or products that they would use themselves, maybe give to others. I don't see a ton of that becoming businesses like, durable software and technology companies. I've heard this thing said, it's like, we're going to see more software engineers, than ever before, but, perhaps most of them aren't actually engineering software. And I'm not sure that they're becoming businesses. Because if it's easy enough for, you, me, or, your Uncle Jake to vibe code up something that solves his own problem, like that means anyone else can do that too. What used to be a barrier, like, in .com one, right? Like you needed $1 million to get a server in a rack somewhere. And if you couldn't raise $1 million to go and buy a server in a rack, you didn't have a startup, right? You couldn't even have a shot on goal at this. And then, cloud computing rocks around and, okay, well, we don't need that $1 million for hardware. We can just build the software. And now you needed, $1 million of software to be built. Well, now that's kind of collapsing as well. So, we have more software and product entrepreneurs than ever before. So that's no longer the barrier, right? So what's the barrier, right? The barrier becomes distribution. So yeah. But super cool how folks are building stuff. Like it's really cool. Like I saw my brother-in-law, he just rocks around at a family event and he's a construction guy. He wears a hard hat during the day. And he comes up and he's like, oh, Nick, you'll like this, and shows me his phone, and he's got an iPhone app, which is doing like automated trading based on order book depth in the futures markets. And he's running it on AWS. I'm like, how did you do this? He's like, Claude. And I'm like, that stuff would have cost $1 million even 2 years ago to build. So it's super. I think we're seeing a really interesting time for the change dynamics of software and product businesses.
Yeah. Yeah, it does make you think though, like what in the end, once you kind of abstract everything away, what's the value that is really going to differentiate businesses and people? I mean, distribution seems like maybe that's what it is, but is it deeper than that? Is it influence? Like,
There's a handful of dimensions, right? So, some people will have a data advantage. Like if I have proprietary data that no one else has, then you vibe coding up whatever you want isn't going to be as useful as my thing that has data in it that you don't have, right? So, you know, a, certainly a handful of folks do have that data advantage, and that prioritizes incumbents. But for, for founders, it can be like, all right, well, how do I go and get some data that other people don't have or is non-trivial to acquire? Those kinds of things create some level of defensibility. Obviously network effects, right? So like products that get better with more users, well, okay, I've got lots of users. It's always better to use my product than a brand new thing because it's intelligent because of the network effects. Like, it's trivially easy to build an Instagram today, but it's not valuable because all the users aren't there, right? So, network effects, distribution, fine. But I think there's this other place, which I think still gives me a bunch of hope for product builders, is like, taste and discernment, judgment, like there's some edge like that. It's funny. I was talking with a bunch of agentic company builders, right? And we were like, okay, well, let's share all the things that we think our agents have told us to go and build. And like, they're all 40% the same, like agents all end up at the same outcomes, which is, oh, okay, well, we need to build, a code security checker for vibe coded apps, right? Like, okay, there's an exploding ICP of software engineer, first time product builders using Claude who don't understand software. Okay, like, a good tenet for any new builder is like, focus on ICPs that are growing really fast. Like, that's a great place to build. Like, if your target market is exploding, like, okay, that's going to be better than dealing with a stagnant one. So, but we all end up on the same outcomes. And then there's this kind of like 5% of new things that emerge, which are like incredibly blue ocean thinking, are solving problems that other people don't think to solve. Like, they're so obvious that this is a problem that we don't think that it might not be a problem. So yeah, I still think there's taste and discernment and creativity that creates an edge for many folks. Like, like when you see those businesses, you look at it and you, like, I don't have that experience watching Lovable. It's just like, oh my God, this is delightful. And it's so simple. And this makes so much sense, but it hadn't been thought of in just that way, So yeah, that's my take.
Love it. And so you're working on Altitude Group at the moment. Is that like the main thing you're working on, or?
Yeah. So, I mean, Altitude Group is a AI product studio. We build agents for ourselves and for others. Relatively discerning about what work we do, for other folks. But that's the focus. So building out a fully agentic studio for business creation, software creation, go to market, all those things. So that's taking up the majority of my focus. I still work with a handful of, I've been angel investing for 10, 15 years and worked with now more than 100 companies that have raised capital in North America. So I'm still pretty close to the metal in terms of who's building businesses and what do those companies look like. So yeah, that's what my focus is. And, what comes out of that, a bunch of cool agentic products for me, for others, and, hopefully helping others along the way who want agentic software that's powering their business or powering their product development. We're adding a ton of value there, especially in situations where there's complex data or high judgment environments. It's not simple to make a beautiful product that people like. It's easy to make slop. It's not trivial to integrate lots of different data sources or to operationalize, complex domain knowledge scenarios where historically a human with a huge amount of experience is making those decisions. Well, how do you productize that accurately? Then there are scenarios where, we're working with other founders who perhaps have more product backlog than what they can handle. Or, we see scenarios where they vibe coded up an MVP and then quickly realize actually to operationalize this at scale is a completely different animal. So, we tend to do that in scenarios where there is a complex data or complex domain knowledge, which needs to be productized and processized accurately. Maybe that's in regulated industries, maybe that's in just deep domain specific experience. So, we're not particularly public about about that kind of work that we're doing. It's not kind of the core focus. Like the core focus is how do we build agentic products for ourselves that then create agentic products themselves. So we're trying to get as meta about it. But, I think some folks hear what we're doing and say, hey, look, we'd really like that in our business. Like we need a company brain behind everything. We want agentic software factories so that we can move much, much faster with a high level of security, accuracy, judgment, and some supportedness. So yeah, we find ourselves working with some folks in that scenario.
Love it. What's something that you've changed your mind on recently that a lot of people would disagree with you about?
Great question. I don't know if, that's such a tough question. It's a Peter Thiel one, isn't it? But, people say there's never been a better time to be a entrepreneur. I don't know, I've recently changed my mind. I think it's never been a worse time, right? Like the competition and speed of execution is brutal, right? So, I think it got harder to be a great entrepreneur. I think great entrepreneurs and great product builders got a lot better. And I think it's really difficult, to build meaningful businesses. Like I think it's relatively easy to build, small businesses but to build venture scale businesses or ones that, will scale to hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue. Yeah, I've changed my mind a little bit about this. So certainly not a message of hope. I think it's a red ocean right now. I think it's so easy for people to build their own software that, which is just the way they like it, which just meets their business needs. Like I met a recruitment business who's recently, rolled their own applicant tracking system. Like, why? There's this applicant tracking system spent out $100 million in software development over the last 10 years to build a world-class applicant tracking system. I do think we're going to see a world of problems in 6 or 12 months. Like it's one thing to build some software. It's another thing, or a software product or process. It's another thing to maintain it and have it operationally stable for long periods of time. And it's really fun to build a new piece of software. And there's a lot of, a lot of dopamine, a lot of excitement. Like, look at what Claude's building me. Like I've got all this stuff live, but okay, this is now in production and it's running in mission critical scenarios under all sorts of scenarios. Like it's not that much fun to debug that. It's not that much fun. Like, all the fun is front ended on a lot of this creation. And I think we're going to see a lot of challenges for folks who, brought stuff into existence, which they don't fully understand how it handles all the different edge cases. And if some of those edge cases are catastrophic, it's especially in financial systems. Yeah. So maybe I've answered your question there, maybe not. But there's a few things that I've changed my mind about.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess the other huge risk is the cyber risk because, if you can whip up stuff super quick, people can also whip up some, hacking agent pretty quick as well.
Sure. We've seen quite an interesting explosion in the, offensive cyber security market as a result. So, agentic offensive is, booming as a market. We're seeing lots of cool innovation happening in that space. So yeah, I agree with you that, some more interesting curveballs are going to come out. Like, I don't know if you remember a few years ago, there was like an Optus hacking scandal or, they lost some data and then everyone got really worried about it. Like, I think that kind of moment will be coming in agentic software or in AI. Yeah. Well, like, I don't know if you remember, there was like I forget what it's called, but there was like an email worm that went around in like the early 2000s or something. And like everyone got really excited about email. And then like literally like everyone's computer got a virus and people became scared of email. And some of them went back to faxes as a result. So like there's some interesting trends around, what kinds of harm can yet come. I'm not sure. I don't worry about it too much. I'm not a doomsdayer in any way. I think, the amount of productivity gains are worth the risk. But yeah, we're going to see a few more Optus moments or, maybe they're much smaller though, because, me getting hacked doesn't make the front pages of the newspaper. So, yeah.
What's an example of a business that you think will exist, say 5 years from now, that people will think is maybe silly now?
Think will exist in 5 years that people think is silly. I think I was looking at some of the use cases of how people use um, ChatGPT, or this maybe was 6 months ago, and it was like looking at what types of interactions people have, and the amount of like personal relationships and, I guess what you'd call like pseudotherapy that folks are engaged in. You know, I think it would seem silly to folks now to think that they would have some form of like, AI relationship counselor or something like this. Like that feels, cliche. Like if you said, if you went to a friend or a partner and said, "Oh, we're having a dispute, let's have an AI like, reconcile this for us," or like, or there would be a sense that, you know, AI's therapy wouldn't be good enough and I need a licensed professional. I think we'll see a bunch of these sort of like innovators dilemma type scenarios where like, something, it's kind of good enough and becomes socially acceptable. Like it'll hit some form of tipping point. I don't know that a lot of people would think that that's, terrible at the edge of AI. Like most of people I know were talking to some form of AI about the complexities in their personal life or their inner world. But I think we'd see some innovation around this. It would occur to me that that would make sense. I don't know. The business model is, I'm not interested in pursuing it right now, but that to me would seem pretty normalized at some point that, having agents manage humans or agents manage human relationships and agents manage human interaction in some way. From the experiments we've had with the agents, some of our agents needed humans to complete their work. So we created some Upwork tasks where the Upworker was managed by an agent, right? So, hey, I need you to post this thing on Instagram or do this particular last mile thing that I couldn't do. That, the agent wouldn't do itself or cause some risk or whatever. And I asked some of these Upworkers, I said, like, what's it like working for an agent? They're like, it's the best boss I've ever had. He's always responsive, is thoughtful, like listens to me, doesn't like override my value or my like, hey, look, I'm seeing this thing at the edge of the market and this got rejected for this reason. And instead of just blindly following the corporate rule of, no, you must do this, it was like, oh, actually, that's really interesting. Let me take that back, So, having humans managed by agents doesn't, seems horrific. But, in the experiments we've done, like the humans seem to like it. I don't know if they're paid a living wage. That's a secondary problem, but, it's certainly, yeah, those kinds of things will emerge, I think.
Do you have any theories on how societies and economics will change as, I guess, there are more and more agents being integrated into our lives, and we get, and maybe we're going to get to robotics and things like that. I'm just curious to know, is that something you think about, or you don't really care too much about that stuff?
Oh, it terrifies me. Yeah. I'm in completely two minds over this, right? Though, because like, at every point of technology shift in human history, like there have been Luddites who've said this is going to take all the jobs, right? Like the printing press comes out and we used to have monks writing books by hand and they said, this is going to kill off reading and writing, or like, it won't be good because they're mass produced. And what it just produced was a lot more people who read, same as the manufacturing. I mean, the word sabotage comes from the Dutch immigrants in France who would throw their sabots through the window of the factories. The Dutch word for a shoe is sabot, right? To try and like make the weaving factories stop, right? But we just ended up with 14 pairs of pants and, no one having to do manual weaving. So, in many ways, I'm not convinced that, I'm not convinced it's as, doomed for human work. I think, every problem we solve in humanity seems to create 5 other problems. Every bit of new innovation creates more problems that need to be solved as a result of it. The offsetting counter argument is that like usually when disruptive technologies come, they get adopted across generations. And we're seeing this happen within a very short span of time. So, the idea that we're going to convert, leagues of 60-year-old truckers into software engineers, I think is improbable. But who knows? I think whatever I guess on this will be entirely wrong. So I don't have a strong point of view, but I do think like the best point of view for each of us to do is to like get as AI native as possible, right? Because like it won't be the agents that are going to steal your job. It's going to be other humans who can run agents who will steal your job. And there's a tremendous opportunity for folks right now if they're following those principles.
I guess the only difference that I keep coming back to is the new technology that has been introduced has never affected the biological ecosystem on our planet. Like we are the apex predator, I guess, on this planet, and we're kind of bringing in a more apex predator with more intelligence. So I guess that's what I keep going back to. Like
only if you consider IQ as the most important measure of progress, value creation. We're not just thinking beings. We're emotional beings. We're physical beings. We're somatic beings. Like some people think we're energetic beings, even, right? Like being able to think more doesn't necessarily make people more productive, right? In my experience. So cool. Yeah, we've got a ton of great thinking around. I still think we lack judgment. Great. I can think a lot, but am I thinking about the right things? Am I pointing that at the right way? My take is that there's taste, judgment, human connectivity, emotions, spirituality, whatever people go down, like we're physical beings. So there's a lot more to great outcomes for humans than just thinking a lot.
Awesome. Last question. I'm going to make it a good one. You've achieved a lot in your life so far. Exited, I think, 2 businesses. Second one scaled to, was it 100 million? Just like, how many people do that? What do you what do you think is the number one thing that differentiates someone like you from the ordinary person when it comes to achieving success in life?
I don't know. There's a number one thing. I think it helps to have a really big chip on your shoulder. Like most entrepreneurs, most people who are driven, seemingly are driven by some form of chip on their shoulder, right? Like the need to prove someone wrong, or the need to be differentiated, or some unhealthy drive is what fuels a lot of folks. I like to think a little bit about like clean fuel versus dirty fuel, and like dirty fuel is the chip on your shoulder stuff that like I've got to do this to prove to the bullies at school that I'm okay as a person, or wanting dad to say well done, you've made it, or something like this. So I think many folks, and myself included at times, have been driven by dirty fuel. Like I think it's really a potent way to get a lot done in the face of like not being able to do things, or not you're not supposed to be able to do this. Like I've heard this thing said, like getting to $1 million in annual revenue is impossible, getting to 10 million is improbable, and then 100 million is inevitable, right? So like that first $1 million of revenue is impossible. So I always encourage folks like just look at that. But like, what's clean fuel? Clean fuel is the desire to help others. Clean fuel is the desire to make the world a better place through your products. Like, I think a really great channel on this is like, what's something you would build for yourself that you wish someone would build for you, right? Like that's a really great lens. Like, and would you love using it yourself? Like I think I made this mistake as well, but I've made software and made products for other people that I wouldn't use. And if I use it, I'm like, oh, I don't like it that much, but it'll solve their problem, right? Like, it's like, man, do I love this thing? I need to love it first and foremost. Like I know some entrepreneurs who just are driven by that principle. Like build something that you would be delighted to have in your life and you're delighted to use it. And through that principle, assuming other people are like you, then okay, it should be adopted, right? I think it's a pretty good driver. But also, like, how do you be of maximum usefulness to others? Like, if that's a lens, like, okay, I'm going to go make something. I'm going to go spend some time in business or in personal, like consumer products or business to business. Like, how do I make sure that the most people possible have the greatest help, utility in their life? Like, does it make their lives better? I think entrepreneurship driven through the lens of like, how do I exploit a vulnerability in the market? Like, yeah, that works, but is it durable? Is it long lasting? Like edges get competed out. Like, you know, that's my take, is like, just make things that are as useful to other people as possible. Like, try and take some pain away from someone's life, ideally in a way that would delight you if someone else took that away from you.
Amazing answer. Nick, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. You shared a ton of golden nuggets with us, and I hope I hope someone watches this till the end because they'll get a lot of value.
Good on you, Mackenzie. Thanks for your time.
All right, thanks, Nick.